와보지 않고는 모를걸?
Korea's presidential office has urged North Korea to immediately withdraw its troops dispatched to help Russia's fight in Ukraine and warns of phased response measures that'll match the degree of the regime's military cooperation with Moscow. Israel conducted an airstrike in Syria that killed an individual in charge of funding Hezbollah amid its efforts to cut off financial support for the Lebanon-based militant group. With the U.S. presidential election 2 weeks away, Kamala Harris and Donald Trump zero in on their campaigning in key swing states amid a neck-and-neck race. It's October 22nd, 8 p.m. in Seoul. This is Newscenter. Thank you for joining us. I'm Yoon Jung-min. We start with details of an image that has been shared online as the international community addresses North Korea's latest support of Russia's warfare in Ukraine. Our foreign affairs correspondent Bae Yoon-ji has this report.
North Korean and Russian flags displayed side by side, supporting claims that the North has sent troops to assist Russia to fight against Ukraine. A pro-Russian social media account posted this image, saying that it was taken in Pokrovsk, one of the strongholds on Ukraine's eastern front. Citing the head of the Center for Countering Disinformation at Ukraine's National Security and Defense Council, Ukrainian local media reports that whether the flags were actually there or photoshopped, Russia is apparently trying to create fear in Ukraine, to make people believe that there are hundreds of thousands of North Korean troops. This comes after South Korea's intelligence agency officially confirmed last week that North Korea had deployed around 1,500 Special Forces troops to Russia. Ukraine followed up with its own evidence, releasing a video showing soldiers lining up to receive their uniforms and equipment while speaking Korean, and a questionnaire that appears to have been prepared by Russia for North Korean soldiers for their military uniform measurements. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky on Monday called for decisive action from its allies.
It is obvious that Putin fears peace, which is why he is looking for ways to escalate the aggression and involve North Korea on the front line.
Amid rising concerns, military cooperation between Pyongyang and Moscow is being voiced among the international community. During a UN Security Council meeting in New York on Monday local time, South Korea's ambassador to the United Nations said that by dispatching a large number of troops, North Korea will likely become an active belligerent in warfare, and that this could have consequences for all.
This is not merely an attack on the very integrity of the Security Council sanctions regime. It is a blatant attempt to undermine peace and security, not only in Europe and in Northeast Asia, but also across the entire globe.
The United States, which is yet to confirm the deployment of North Korean troops, told the 15-member council that if Russia is indeed turning to the north for manpower, it will be a sign of desperation on the Kremlin's part.
If true, this marks a dangerous and highly concerning development and an obvious deepening of the DPRK-Russia military relationship. We are consulting with our allies and partners on the implications of such a dramatic move.
Separately, the White House said that it'll be releasing a statement in the next couple of days. However, North Korea has rejected the claims, saying at the UN General Assembly meeting on the same day that they're baseless rumors, and that the regime does not feel the need to respond. Bae Yoon-ji, Arirang News.
Here in South Korea, the National Security Council has filed an action plan in accordance with the scale of North Korean support of Russian warfare against Ukraine, which could include reviewing weapons supply. Our top office correspondent Kim Do-yeon reports.
A quote, military collusion is what the presidential office called North Korea's deployment of troops to support Russia's invasion of Ukraine while calling for an immediate halt and the retrieval of forces. This came on Tuesday as the National Security Council held a standing committee meeting to discuss potential responses.
The government will implement phased response measures according to the progress of military cooperation between Russia and North Korea following North Korea's dispatch of combat troops. In this process, we will closely coordinate with our allies and friendly nations to ensure that strong and effective measures are taken against the Russia-North Korea military cooperation.
While the top office opted not to specify what the responses would be, as revealing them could impact future cooperation between Russia and North Korea, an official told reporters that responses could be through diplomacy, economic retaliations, or even military action. The official also said weapons supply could be an option. So far, non-lethal weapons have been supplied to Ukraine by South Korea, but the government will reconsider. It will first consider supplying defensive weapons, but if the situation escalates further, it will consider offensive weapons. The top office also called out North Korea for neglecting its own people, calling it a criminal organization.
Meanwhile, attendees of the meeting pointed out that the North Korean regime, which has completely ignored the livelihoods and human rights of its people while focusing solely on nuclear missile development, is now driving young North Koreans into a senseless war of mercenaries for Russia. This, we noted, is an act of admitting that the regime is a criminal organization.
In the meantime, South Korea is the only country to confirm North Korea's deployment of troops for Russia, other than Ukraine, with President Volodymyr Zelensky saying so himself. A top office official says that the intel was a result of gathering and sharing with the nation's allies and friendly nations like the U.S. and Ukraine over an extended period of time. Therefore, the current stance taken by the U.S., who has much to consider before confirming this, is unrelated to the objectivity of the intelligence. In fact, confirmation should follow soon. In addition, the official said that it's not clear how the deployment will impact the front lines in Ukraine, as there are many factors that will play into it. And South Korea currently is diplomatically calling for the retrieval of troops before it gets to the front lines and to stop the cooperation at this stage. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
For more on this issue, our North Korean affairs correspondent Kim Jung-sil joins us here in the studio. Jung-sil, Seoul has officially confirmed the deployment of North Korean troops to Russia, while Western nations, including the U.S., have taken a more cautious stance. Why is there a discrepancy?
Yes, Jung-min, the situation is quite complex. South Korea's National Intelligence Service recently confirmed the deployment of North Korean troops to Russia, which may be part of the broader strategic partnership treaty signed back in June. On the other hand, countries like the U.S. and other Western nations are taking a more cautious stance. First, the U.S. might be holding off on confirmation because it's still gathering solid intelligence on its own. Additionally, it could be opting for a careful approach until after the upcoming high-level security talks with Seoul. Meanwhile, Russia appears to have shifted from denying the reports to a more ambiguous stance, which may be strategic. Dmitry Peskov, the Kremlin spokesperson, emphasized that strengthening ties with North Korea is a sovereign right that shouldn't raise concerns for other nations. Let's listen to his comments on the troop deployment reports.
We are seeing a lot of contradictory information. South Koreans say one thing, the Pentagon says it has no confirmation of such statements, and there is a lot of contradictory information. Perhaps it must be treated as such.
Now, Jung-sil, let's dive into the potential impact. What does this mean for the Korean Peninsula and for Europe to have North Korean troops in Europe, Russia, I mean?
Yes, the ripple effects could be significant both on the Korean Peninsula and in Europe. If North Korean troops are actively involved in Ukraine, it would indicate a strengthening of the de facto military alliance between North Korea and Russia, potentially shifting the balance of power in both regions. Professor Kim Jae-chun of Hoguk University highlights the strategic importance of these relations.
For North Korea to dispatch military troops to Ukrainian battlefields indicate that the Russia and North Korea treaty that they entered into last June has morphed into de facto military alliance. What is military alliance? If you are at war, your military alliance partners should also participate in that war. So from that perspective, for North Korea to participate in Ukrainian war is quite natural.
North Korean involvement could redefine dynamics in a rapidly changing global landscape, potentially extending beyond Northeast Asia to directly impact Europe. Professor Remco Brucker from Leiden University discusses the risks Europe may face.
If the North Korean military is indeed in Russia and is going to engage the Ukrainian army at the front line, no, it could pretty much go anywhere in Europe. North Korea may very well tip the balance in the favor of Russia. And that's a scary thought, because the Baltic states would be at risk, Poland would be at risk, Eastern Europe would be at risk.
We've also seen provocations and threats from North Korea concerning the drone allegations. Just a few hours ago, the sister of North's sister, Kim Yo-jong, has released a statement threatening Seoul yet again.
Yes, in her statement on Tuesday afternoon, Kim noted that more leaflets had been found as of Monday in the north, and warned that the consequences of these actions could be catastrophic. North Korea has long shown extreme sensitivity to external impacts such as leaflets, which are perceived as direct threats to the regime's stability. Regarding the drones that Pyongyang claims are carrying leaflets, the Joint Chiefs of Staff stated they cannot confirm North Korea's announcement and see no value in responding. Experts suggest that what we're witnessing may not just be a tit-for-tat escalation, but part of Pyongyang's broader strategy to create a crisis atmosphere. Take a listen to their analysis on this.
What North Koreans are worrying about the most these days is North Korean people, getting to know these, truths about their regime, how hideous the regime is, and also influence of South Korean so-called K-culture.
We should definitely see it in a context in which the tensions on the Korean Peninsula need to be high, I think, for North Korea, in order to be able to more or less get away with sending troops to Russia.
Experts believe by keeping tensions elevated on the Korean Peninsula, Pyongyang can distract from its own vulnerabilities while legitimizing its actions abroad, such as supporting Russia in Ukraine. Pyongyang's recent actions, like blowing up roads linked to the south and issuing threats regarding drones and leaflets, signal an escalation in its ongoing high-stakes approach, rooted in the regime's survival strategy.
Well, we will definitely keep an eye on further developments. Thank you, Jung-shi, for the analysis.
Thank you.
Amid heightened tensions on the Korean Peninsula, an annual large-scale military exercise is currently taking place in the country, involving a combined river crossing exercise with the U.S. The presence of a special bridging vehicle caught the attention. Our defense correspondent Kim Bo-kyung had a chance to go and watch.
After the smokescreen is set up, K-21 armored vehicles cross the river one by one. This is the part of Korea and the United States combined river crossing exercise as part of the annual large-scale military Hoguk drill. The exercise began its 3-week run since on Sunday, aiming to enhance the combat capabilities and joint forces interoperability against North Korea's threats. Considering the geographical features of having lots of streams and rivers on the peninsula, river crossings are essential. And thus, as part of large-scale field training exercise, 1,000 soldiers from battalions of ROK Army's 7th Maneuver Corps, along with the 2nd Infantry Division ROK-US Combined Forces, took part in combined wet gap crossing training exercises.
A contested wet gap crossing is one of the hardest operations to execute in land warfare. To execute it together, as we did, with our same soldiers sharing our equipment, to span the gap that neither of us could span on our own, is an outstanding demonstration of the strength and commitment of the ROK-US alliance.
One notable amphibious bridging vehicle that has been self-produced by Korea is the KM-3 that had its inaugural deployment in June. This is the first time this KM-3, or Suryong, roughly translated to water dragon in English, has been deployed in the real river crossing drill.
I'm currently riding on a KM-3 amphibious bridging vehicle. This vehicle can turn into a bridge, allowing troops and other vehicles, such as tanks, to swiftly cross rivers.
The KM-3, a Korean version of Germany's M3 amphibious rig, has been developed by Hanwha Aerospace and can carry equipment weighing up to 60 tons. Not only does it reduce the installation time by up to 70%, but also operational personnel by up to 80%.
The time for setup takes much less for the existing RBS, the ribbon bridge system. It can be deployed within 10 minutes, and only 3, the 1/6 of the personnel, is required to set up. It thus enables quicker and more stable support for river crossing operations.
The Hoguk defense drill will go on until November 8th. 김보경, Arirang News, 여주.
Russian President Vladimir Putin is playing host to this year's BRICS summit starting Tuesday under the shadow of his war in Ukraine, and much attention is on the agenda of his interactions with his BRICS partners. Choi Soo-hyung has more.
Russian President Vladimir Putin and Chinese President Xi Jinping will meet again at the BRICS summit being held in Russia. Russia is hosting this year's 3-day annual BRICS summit in the city of Kazan in the Russian Republic of Tatarstan from Tuesday. President Putin and President Xi are continuing their meetings at the BRICS summit following the Shanghai Cooperation Organization summit in Kazakhstan in July, a state visit to Beijing in May, and the Belt and Road Forum in China in October last year. This meeting comes after the South Korean National Intelligence Service announced that North Korea has sent troops to Russia in support of the war in Ukraine, raising attention as to whether the two leaders will discuss this issue. Returning with Xi, Putin is also set to hold multiple bilateral talks on the sidelines, with speculation that Russia's use of North Korean troops for its war in Ukraine will be on the agenda. The Kremlin has called the summit one of the largest-scale foreign policy events ever to be held in Russia. The theme of the event is strengthening multilateralism for fair global development and security. Amid heightened geopolitical tensions, BRICS, a group designed to bring together developing countries to challenge Western dominance, will kick off its largest summit yet, with 5 new member states this year. Along with Xi, India's Narendra Modi, Turkey's Recep Tayyip Erdogan, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, and 24 heads of state are expected to attend, including the newest members of Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE. The first ever summit of BRICS Plus will likely discuss the wars in Ukraine and the Middle East and improving economic and cultural cooperation within the bloc. And despite speculation that the Ukraine war and an international arrest warrant would isolate Putin, more countries are seeking membership, with Turkey, Azerbaijan, and Malaysia already having made formal applications. During the summit, President Putin is also expected to advocate for a new global payment system, moving away from the Western-led financial system. Choi Soo-hyung, Arirang News.
In the Middle East, the man in charge of funding the Lebanese militant group Hezbollah has reportedly been killed in Syria. Park Go-nu with the details.
More Israeli attacks to cut off financial support for Hezbollah. On Monday, the Israeli military said it conducted an airstrike on Damascus, Syria, resulting in Hezbollah's financial arm, who's been supporting the militant group with Iran-backed funds, dead. It also said it'll carry out more attacks in the coming days. Israel also launched airstrikes against Beirut on Sunday evening, targeting branches of a financial institution linked with Iran-backed Hezbollah. According to the Israeli military, it targeted money held by the Al-Qard Al-Hassan Association, which offers financial services to civilians in regions where Hezbollah has strong support. The airstrikes also targeted branches located in southern Lebanon. Israel and the U.S. have accused the association of being a cover for the militant group to fund its activities. Meanwhile, U.S. Special Envoy Amos Hochstein said Washington is working on a plan to end the conflict between Israel and Hezbollah for good, as the Biden administration looks to prevent the situation in the Middle East from spiraling out of control.
Well, the United States wants to end this conflict as soon as possible. We're working with the government of Lebanon, the state of Lebanon, as well as the government of Israel, is to get to a formula that brings an end to this conflict once and for all.
Hochstein, who's in Beirut, said he held a very constructive meeting with Lebanese Parliament Speaker Nabi Berri, a close ally of Hezbollah. Berri has been engaging in diplomatic efforts to end the conflict with Israel. With the U.S. presidential election only 2 weeks away, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is visiting the Middle East once again, hoping to push for negotiations to end the war in Gaza and secure the release of Israeli hostages held by Hamas. Blinken's trip will be from Monday to Friday, taking him to Israel and other Middle Eastern countries. According to the U.S. State Department, Blinken will also seek to continue discussions on post-war plans and emphasize the need for Palestinians to find new ways to rebuild their lives. Park Gonu, Arirang News.
In precisely 2 weeks' time, the U.S. will elect a new leader to take on a host of tasks, both at home and overseas. For more on the presidential campaign as well as prospects, here's our Lee Si-hoo.
With just 2 weeks remaining until the November 5th U.S. presidential election, the Democratic presidential candidate, Vice President Kamala Harris, and the Republican candidate and former President Donald Trump are focusing their efforts to win over undecided voters in key swing states. Harris on Monday visited the battleground states of Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin with former Republican Congresswoman Liz Cheney. There, Harris and Cheney held conversations with voters, many of whom were conservative, suburban women in the Midwestern states. Harris described Trump as a threat to democracy who is increasingly unstable.
And it should lead us to observe that he is increasingly unstable. But you don't have to take my word for it. Listen to the people who know him best.
Cheney, the daughter of Dick Cheney, the vice president under President George W. Bush, and one of the most prominent Republicans to have endorsed Harris, backed her up.
He's a man who's unfit to be the president of this good and honorable and great nation.
Speaking on abortion rights and national security, Cheney painted Trump as irresponsibly dangerous, while describing Harris as the reasonable choice. Meanwhile, Trump visited another battleground state, North Carolina, whose conservative mountain regions were recently hit by Hurricane Helen. Trump appealed to religious voters, saying that he was saved during July's assassination attempt against him by a supernatural hand.
And I would like to think that God saved me for a purpose, and that's to make our country greater than ever before.
At another rally, Trump expressed strong outrage about a top voter concern, border security, and criticized the current administration.
Biden put this total stupid person in charge of our border. Think of it. Never made a call, never went there. She let it just all, she said, keep those borders open, let everybody come in.
On Monday, early voting opened in Florida and Texas, while some opened their booths last week. According to NBC's early voting tracker, more than 14 million Americans have already cast their ballots. And as opinion polls show a close race, the race for the White House remains a toss-up.
It's extremely close, especially in the battleground states. Among likely voters, 49% support Harris and 48% support Trump.
It's likely that in the next 14 days, Harris and Trump will continue to focus their campaigns on the 7 key swing states. Lee Si-hoo, Arirang News.
All heavy rain warnings on the southern coast have been lifted. However, autumn rain is falling across the country, making the weather feel cold. Please be careful for any safety accidents, as strong rain accompanied by thunder and lightning may be concentrated until dawn tomorrow. Up to 50 millimeters of rain is expected in eastern parts of Gyeonggi-do Province, western parts of Gangwon-do Province, and northern Chungcheongbuk-do Province. 5 to 40 millimeters in the Seoul metropolitan area and other inland areas, and 20 on Jeju Island. This rain will mostly stop at dawn tomorrow. Please pay attention to traffic safety, as the visibility will be low and the roads will be slippery in rainy areas. Tomorrow morning, Seoul will start off chilly at 11 degrees Celsius, Gwangju and Gyeongju 13 degrees. Daily highs will move up to 16 in Seoul, Daegu and Jeju 20 degrees. The temperature in Seoul is expected to drop to 8 degrees Celsius on Thursday morning, and the autumn cold is expected to come around. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world.
And that is Newscenter for tonight. Thank you for watching. A panel session up next.
요즘 한국에선 어떻게 노는지 알려줄까?
한국에선 아이돌이 되어볼 수도, 인생 번호를 찾을 수도 있지.
제일 핫한 포토 스팟은 여기.
한국은 분명 너에게 새로운 영감을 줄 거야.
이런 한국, 와보지 않고는 모를걸? 진짜 한국에선 어떻게 먹는지 알려줄까?
K-바비큐? 신김치랑 먹어야지.
치킨? 치맥 페스티벌은 처음이지?
김치? 종류만큼 먹는 법도 가지각색.
김밥? 시장에선, 산에선, 바다에선 이렇게.
국밥? 취향 따라, 입맛 따라.
이런 한국, 와보지 않고는 모를걸?
How to survive in Korea. Barbecue restaurants. Step 1. Taking care of your clothes. Put your jacket in the plastic bag. Seal it tight. If the stool flips open, store your clothes inside. Wearing light colors? Grab an apron. It's the best defense against oil splatter and smoke. Step 2. Bottomless side dishes. Basic side dishes at a barbecue restaurant. Eat, and eat as much as you want. Side dishes come with free refills. Oh, and if you don't see this sign, just ask, 사장님, 여기 밑반찬 좀 더 주세요. Simple, isn't it? Step 3. Grilling meat. There are various kinds of samgyeopsal in Korea. Place the meat on the grill. Turn it over when golden. And again when it looks done. Again and again and again. Step 4. Sam style. You aren't taking bites of sam like a taco, are you? In Korea, we have it in one bite. A pro tip here. Add only as much as you can handle in a bite. Gotta avoid awkward situations. Step 5. Enjoy the perks. After the meal, enjoy the perks offered as a Korean restaurant. Fabric refreshers get rid of the barbecue smell, while mint candies freshen your breath. Did you survive the barbecue restaurant? Hang on. Are you here with someone you want to impress? Then let's skip the garlic. Who knows what will happen?
세종합단 재단과 함께하는 K챗이 새로운 시즌으로 돌아옵니다.
이게 제 가방이에요.
지금 뭐예요?
역전으로 기름떡볶이를 사는 중이에요.
저는 집에서 음악을 듣고 있어요.
경복궁 구경한 후에 저녁 먹어요. 정말 커요. 제 팔만 해요.
한국을 여행하면서 사용할 수 있는 한국어 표현부터 흥미로운 한국 문화까지 더 풍성하고 재미있는 K챗 트래블링 코리아에서 만나요.
Presiding over Monday's cabinet meeting following his latest diplomatic agenda in New York, President
South Korea's economy will grow.
Central Bank has kept its key interest rate unchanged. Mission complete for rocket booty South Korea. Seoul is rallying in hopes of bringing the World Expo 2030.
Arirang.
Hello and welcome to Within the Frame, where we delve into the most up-to-date issues across the globe. I'm Kim Mo-gan. South Korea's finance ministry says the nation's economy has been on a path of recovery for 6 straight months, largely driven by strong exports. Seoul has, as of September, enjoyed a remarkable 12 consecutive months of export growth thanks to the semiconductor sector. South Korea posted exports worth $58.7 billion, which not only is the largest amount so far this year, but also an all-time high for any September. However, recent figures from Samsung Electronics have raised concerns about the industry's future. So how sustainable is growth in the industry, and what challenges lie ahead for the Korean economy in general? For answers to this, we invite Kim Se-won, Professor of Economics at Ewha Women's University. Welcome to the show, Professor.
Thank you for having me today.
And we're also joined by Lee Seo-hyun, Associate Professor at KDI School of Public Policy Management. Thank you for coming on, Professor.
Pleasure to be here.
Now, starting with Professor Kim. So as of September, like I've mentioned, South Korea's exports have seen increases for 12 consecutive months. The government is optimistic about maintaining a positive export trend this month as well. Would you attribute the strong performance in exports mainly to semiconductors?
Korean export maintains pretty robust momentum from the beginning of this year. As you said, the main driving force of the whole export is the semiconductor export, which has been the #1 export item from 10 years ago. The export of semiconductor continued its upward trend this month. Actually, the semiconductor export increased by 36% against last year in early October. In the same period, however, most other categories saw a decline, including passenger cars by negative 3.3%, petroleum products by negative 40%, and so on. Actually, semiconductor export had a hard time until 2023 due to the shrink in global demand after the rise of demand over COVID pandemic. But again, the export of semiconductors has been on the rise since turning upward in November last year, continuing to post double-digit growth rate so far. It is believed that this upward trend of global semiconductor demand would be continued for 2 to 3 years at least, thanks to the rise of artificial intelligence industries.
Right, so 2 to 3 years we're looking forward to. That's good to hear. But however, there are also concerns regarding the outlook for the semiconductor industry. Samsung Electronics has reported preliminary results for the third quarter that fell short of market expectations. Professor Lee, how do you foresee semiconductor exports in the near future? And do you think it's possible for South Korea to achieve its largest export performance this year?
Yeah, the current underperformance of semiconductor industry in South Korea seems to be more significant than that of Taiwan and Japan. And this might suggest that the structural characteristics of South Korean semiconductor industry is contributing the lower than expected performance in addition to the global IT cycles. The main export chips of Korea are the memory chips used in a wide range of electronic devices, including smartphones and servers. The weak global smartphone demand is seen as a major factor contributing the slowdown of the recovery in the sector. Also, there are concerns about delays in some Korean companies entering the advanced high-bandwidth memory market, which is compounded by intense competition within the sector. So there is growing demand for HBM used for AI and data processing, and the ability to maintain a competitive edge is key challenge for semiconductor companies in South Korea. Overall, due to the base effect, the pace of recovery in the semiconductor export is expected to be slowed down a bit, but an year-on-year export growth for this year is expected to remain strong.
That's good to hear. Now, meanwhile, there's speculation that there are signs of strain in the long-standing alliance between American chip company NVIDIA and Taiwan's TSMC, that this could benefit South Korea's Samsung. Professor Kim, can you explain for us on the current situation in the global semiconductor market?
Well, first of all, I'm not in a position to say that the rumor is true or not. But in the history of global chip industry, major corporations' decisions have determined the fortunes of many companies. For example, when Apple's iPhone rolled out in 2007, the CPU of iPhone was manufactured by Samsung Electronics, but Apple decided to produce its iPhone CPU by TSMC of Taiwan as Samsung Electronics begins to produce its own smartphone, which is Galaxy smartphone. This is why TSMC became so big and powerful in non-memory chip market today. So if the rumor is true about the conflicts between NVIDIA and TSMC, and then NVIDIA finally decides to move to Samsung Electronics in its production of non-memory chips, it can be a turning point for Samsung Electronics to grab the leadership in global non-memory chip market in the long run. What I'm saying is, in the future, if that is true, in the future, we will realize that this was an important moment when we look back.
Mm-hmm. Now, taking a step away from semiconductors, earlier this month, the Bank of Korea lowered the benchmark interest rate to 3.25%, and this has drawn large attention to the timing of domestic recovery. Now, while the government suggests that gradual recovery driven by exports is ongoing, there are voices indicating that recovery is lagging at some point. Professor Lee, what is your diagnosis?
While exports remain resilient, as we have seen so far, the domestic demand is subdued, driven by high price levels despite inflation dropping to its lowest levels, heavy debt repayment burdens, and sluggish income growth among especially the self-employed. Also, the global geopolitical environment is downside risk. Uncertainty related to real estate project financing restructuring remains a potential downside risk for construction sector.
Right. And the direction of international oil prices, which impact the domestic economy, are also under scrutiny. Despite instability in the Middle East, prices have stabilized until around $70 per barrel recently. Professor Kim, what are your thoughts on the future outlook for international oil prices and the factors that influence them?
Well, that is a tough question. I wish I had a crystal ball for oil prices. Actually, in economics, and in other business measures too, we have been trying very hard to forecast future oil price through economic data analysis and theory. But it is so far from perfect because oil market is dominated by geopolitical factors, which is not predictable, and market sentiment, which is not rational either. As of now, there are quite a few uncertainty factors in global oil market, like the war in Ukraine and another war in Israel, particularly as the tension escalates between Iran and Israel. The worst scenario of the global oil market is Iran's full-scale participation in the war. Market expects that if that happens, even though that is the worst scenario, market markets, oil price would be skyrocketed up to $200 per barrel. But as of now, increased oil production from major oil-producing countries like United States has helped offset potential supply disruptions. Also, global demand has remained steady due to economic uncertainty, particularly from China, and ongoing energy transition to environment-friendly energy sources.
So, are you implying that it could go up, but not as dramatic?
Well, it really depends on geopolitical factors in the future. But since the power of stabilizing the oil market is stronger than that of the disrupting factors from the geopolitical factors, the global oil market price will be stabilized at the level between $70 to $80 per barrel.
All right, Professor, thank you for clearing that up. Now, here in South Korea, the government is set to decide on Wednesday whether to extend its fuel tax reduction scheme that has been in place since November 2021. Now, this measure has already been extended 11 times and is now into its third year already. Professor Lee, what are the chances of an additional extension, and what reasons might support this decision?
Initially, the fuel tax cuts were introduced in response to the 2022 global energy price surge on the back of high global inflation. It helped actually reduce the increased living cost, especially for those who are vulnerable. But the fuel tax cuts resulted in significant losses for state-owned utility companies and reduced fiscal revenue. Now that energy prices have fallen substantially from their peak in 2023 and remain stable, there is a need to realign the domestic energy prices with international commodity prices to limit the fiscal risks. Actually, last July, the government reduced the rates of tax cuts to 20% for gasoline and 30% for diesel and LPG. And it is now expected that the government will further reduce the rates, but the fuel tax cuts will be extended once more to ease consumer burdens as well as continue to curb inflation. The additional considerations for the decision will be the geopolitical situation, as mentioned by Professor Kim, such as conflicts in Middle East and Ukraine that can affect the global energy prices.
Right. Then, Professor Kim, if the government chooses to extend the fuel tax reduction, what kind of impact might this have on domestic recovery?
Of course, that will give a positive impact on domestic economy in terms of the expansion of the domestic consumption, but the impact will not be so huge as expected. If Korean government extends the fuel tax reduction, of course, it could positively impact domestic economic recovery by reducing cost for businesses and consumers. In addition, lower fuel prices would help ease transportation and manufacturing expenses, that potentially lowering inflationary pressures. This in turn could boost consumer spending and economic activities in the long run. However, it should be noted that the measure might also reduce government tax revenue, which could affect public spending or lead to higher deficits if maintained over the longer term. So balancing these outcomes would be crucial for sustainable recovery.
Right. So for the sake of our understanding, so this fuel tax cut, how long can this be extended, Professor? Could this just go on and go on?
Well, as we talked about, the impact of a real positive real impact on domestic economy is not so huge as expected from the oil tax cut. However, the oil tax cut is in a certain way determined by political political purposes from both of the ruling party and opposition parties. So this is something item that both of the ruling party and opposition party agrees on. So I believe that even though the economic impact of the fuel tax reduction is not as large as expected, that tax reduction will be continued at least by next year. But in the end, as inflation pressure disappears and as economic recovery goes on, maybe hopefully by next year, the tax reduction will be stopped sometime, hopefully next year.
Right. Thank you for the explanation. So now, meanwhile, in another news, the world awaits the results of the upcoming U.S. presidential election on November 5th. And this is also expected to have a significant effect for the South Korean economy. Professor Lee, in what aspects could the outcomes of the U.S. election affect domestic industries?
First, the tariff policies proposed by the two candidates could have significantly different implications for South Korean economy, given South Korea's strong trade ties with both the U.S. and China, especially in strategic high-tech sectors, including semiconductor industry. Trump has pledged to implement a 10% tariff on all imports into the U.S., while imposing a much steeper 60% tariff on products sourced from China. In contrast, Harris is expected to adopt a more targeted approach to taxing imports. Should Trump win and escalate trade tensions between the U.S. and China, it is likely that trade and investments will decline, especially for Korea's leading IT industries. And second, given Trump's commitment to more aggressive policies towards North Korea, it is anticipated that global risk associated with the country rise under a second Trump presidency. This escalation of risks may have adverse consequences for financial markets and foreign exchange markets, potentially leading to higher market volatility.
Right, but regardless of the outcome, both candidates are likely to focus on decoupling from China, which will highlight the need for new industrial and trade strategies. Professor Kim, what strategies do you believe South Korea should implement in response?
I believe that regardless of election outcomes in November, the U.S.-China competition over advanced technologies such as semiconductors and battery will intensify. Particularly concerning part is that Korean battery industry may face a reduction in Inflation Reduction Act, IRA, benefits depending on the election results, which highlights the urgent need for proactive measures by Korean producers and Korean government. If Harris is elected, there is a strong possibility of strengthening domestic investments incentive through an amendment of CHIPS Act, whereas if Trump wins, it is likely to unfold in the form of reinforcing the guidelines provisions of CHIPS Act and tightening investment requirement for allied countries to receive subsidies. That means if Trump wins, more high-tech Korean firms' plants will be moved to U.S. territory. In the chip war between U.S. and China, securing high-performance semiconductors and talent is essential. And if Trump is elected, policies aimed at strictly blocking access to China will be strongly enforced. But if Harris wins this part, U.S. government's strict blocking access to China will be, in a certain way, lessened. As of now, Samsung Electronics and SK Hynix has a huge high-tech plants in Chinese territory, and the renovations, renovating the equipment and machineries in the plant produced by U.S. companies allowed by U.S. government. But as of now under Biden administration. And what I'm saying is if Harris wins, that kind of situation will be continued.
Right. And our final question before we let you go. In a few hours from now, the International Monetary Fund is expected to update its World Economic Outlook report. And the previous report in July projected growth rates of 3.2% for this year and 3.3% for next year. Given the upcoming U.S. election and increasing geopolitical tensions, Professor Lee, what do you expect from the new forecast?
As you mentioned, the new WEO report will be published in an hour or so. So maybe my expectation could be wrong. But I think uncertainties around the baseline forecast for global economic growth remain elevated, though the level of uncertainty has not significantly shifted since last July. And also there is the factors that reduce the uncertainty, which is the monetary easing of central banks, contributed to price stability in most countries without entering recession and large-scale unemployment. So I expect that the emphasis of the new IMF forecast could be more on the medium-term growth prospects of global economy. Boosting growth potential would be a key concern for many countries in order to deliver jobs and raise tax revenues for debt repayments, investments in key infrastructure, and green transition amid aging population.
All right. I'm afraid we'll have to conclude our discussion at this point. We're running out of time. But thank you so much for your insights, Professor Kim and Professor Lee. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Now that wraps up our program for tonight. Thank you for joining us on Within the Frame. Be sure to tune in next time as we continue to explore the stories that matter. Until then, stay informed and engaged.
우리 앞에는 반드시 해결해야 하는